how have you found going from, college football? Obviously there's eyes on it, there's eyeballs, there's attention, but, compared to suddenly being the head coach of a country with, however many tens of millions fans and, particularly in an African context, probably the only country that is so invested in women's football. I don't think there's any other country on the continent, even few in the world, that have such a big passion for the Super Falcons like they do in Nigeria. How is that kind of stepping into not just a different continent, but kind of culturally a different world in terms of the attention, the football, everything? How have you found that?
Yeah, well, I think anytime you take on these kind of projects, you have to understand there's going to be a lot of scrutiny, and a lot of media attention. And unfortunately, those that you usually hear from are the negative ones. You don't have a lot of positive people, messaging you or reaching out saying, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. It's usually, hey, you're terrible, can't wait till you leave, that kind of thing. So you have to just understand, you got to have big shoulders, and you have to understand you can't really let that affect you. I don't do much media at all there. I don't read, the stuff that's out and I know it's there. I'm aware of it, but I don't waste my time and energy worrying about the millions of people and what they think of me in Nigeria. I know I have a job to do. Right. And I'm, as a coach in any sport, you're the one that sees the day in and day out, and why things happen a certain way. And of course, we all have to, as a coach, I have to take responsibility of our results. Our players have to take responsibilities, but there's also a big piece of it where, your federation has to take some responsibility too. So I think that's the one thing that probably doesn't get out there that I found in Africa is there's so many things that can go on within the federation that people there just seem to accept and they don't ever question. Whereas here in the U.S., the culture is completely different. It is scrutinized just like it is in Africa, our women's national team, but everybody knows what's going on with the federation, and they know, if there's money, there's accountability, like our federation has to be very open and public about where they're spending their dollars, much like I'm sure it is in England with the national team there. Like you can't get around things there here. It's just everybody's accountable, and doesn't mean that our federation here is answering the media every day because they don't get involved in that. But there's a level of accountability that the media here seems to know more of the whole workings, not just what the coach is doing. And I've kind of found that in Africa, where it doesn't seem like anybody questions what the federation does. And I don't think there's honestly enough pressure from the people in Nigeria on the federation to start doing things the right way and start answering questions of why things are done the way they're done. They just look at their teams, whether it be the Super Eagles or the Super Falcons, they look at their teams and they just, as a passionate country, they just look at it as it's results. Either you're a good coach because you won or you're a bad coach because you don't. And the players are good players if they win and they're not if they don't. And, that's just, it's only look at it from that standpoint. And they don't really have a deep understanding of what goes on behind the scenes that sometimes can hamstring your opportunity to have success. And so it's taken some time to culturally adapt. And, the hardest thing for me, quite honestly, was coming from the U.S., which is obviously, going for its third World Cup in a row. So it has to be considered, one of the best, if not the best teams in the world. Although I know there's a lot of countries that will argue that, and we'll see, because there's a lot of countries worthy of that title too now. But I had hoped that one of the reasons they brought me in was to help implement some change in the way they do business, and that I could have instituted some change for our players, where they're getting paid regularly and they're not sitting overnight at airports waiting on a connecting leg just because it was a cheaper flight, like let's get them on a flight that gets them with the least amount of connections and time at the airport to our destination. And I was hoping I was going to be able to help influence and some change. And unfortunately, that's not the case. The NFF is not interested in that. And that's, if I have a disappointment, that's been my one big disappointment. And that's why, I recently have spoken out a little bit about some of the things that are going on, is because, once this is over and I leave, you'd like to think you had a small piece of influence in way things are done for the future. So that's probably been my biggest disappointment. Obviously we'd like to have better results, but I'm sure you and I will get into that in a little bit here in our conversation. But, that's probably the biggest cultural aspect that I've had to deal with.
Absolutely. And, just on that, talking about the Federation, you're saying, one of the reasons why you stuck with that job and with Pitt was that kind of security as well. And we know the players, obviously, for the listeners who don't know, at the last women's AFCON, after the semifinal, they went on strike for a couple of days because they weren't getting paid. Throughout your time with Nigeria, do you mind me asking, have you been paid every time? Has that all been on your end sorted out? Have you had any issues in that regard?
No, it's been nothing but a constant issue. I mean, up until about 3 weeks ago, I have been owed 14 months of salary. Up until about 3 weeks ago. And then 3 weeks ago, they paid 7 months of that salary to catch me up. Before that, the year and a half, 2 years before that, the salary was the same thing. I'd go 5-6 months without anything, and then they'd pay you a little bit of it. And then, the same thing. So starting July, we'll be 8 months, behind in salary. And I think we still have players that, we still have players that haven't been paid per diem and bonuses for 2 years ago when we came to America and played in the summer series against the U.S. and Portugal and Jamaica and those. We still have players that haven't been caught up to speed with that. The players, my understanding is the players got paid finally many months later for AFCON, but the other events that we've been at, they haven't been paid. So it's a travesty. And let me say this: the one big difference I would tell you with the players there in Nigeria versus the U.S. In the U.S., players here would die, probably like England, would die to get selected to come into a camp. And the honor of putting the jersey on is more important than anything. It's more important than their clubs, their NWSL clubs, or wherever they're playing. The national team takes precedence. Like, it's such a prideful thing. And I think what I've learned in Nigeria is the players love playing for the country, right? They have that pride of playing for Nigeria. But they don't have that pride like the U.S. players, where it means everything to them to get selected, And I think a lot of that is due to the way they're treated. Their clubs treat them better than they get treated when they get called into a national team. I mean, I could tell you the horror stories of many of our trips where a day before we're leaving, players are going, "Coach, my ticket, they got me flying to this airport, and then I have to spend the night in the airport and connect the next morning." And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, and yet there's no money for a hotel or any. I mean, they come, they don't get their bonuses for wins. They come, they don't get a daily per diem. So it's almost like some players will not come into a call up and say that they're injured or say they have a conflict just for that reason. They want to come for AFCON, they want to come for a World Cup, but all the international friendlies, you have to learn to kind of sort through, and that's why I follow all the players very closely with their club teams to know who really is in an injury situation, who's not, and those kind of things. So it's just a different mentality of playing for your country. Not that they don't want to play, because they do take a lot of pride in playing for their country. And obviously, playing for their country in a World Cup is extremely prideful. But that year in and year out, in those off years, it's not that same kind of pride that it is in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, that's in terms of, I think examples across football history of players doing that when there isn't a great setup, when it's not a big international game, kind of feigning an injury or something. But I mean, I know there's been kind of one of the things. There's been a lot of kind of negativity in terms of the way that the team has been covered and the press and the coverage around the team. I also want to give this opportunity though. You've seen these players, you've been with them for 3 years now, almost. Have there been players during this time that you actually can turn to and say, look, actually these players have stood up. I'm immensely proud of the way they've dealt with this, because this is an incredibly difficult situation for them as well, And so, I think there's a lot of negativity, but I also want to give you a chance to say, these are the players who've really stood up. And, I'm actually very proud of the way they've developed and they've kind of stood up for these things. Have there been any players who've really impressed you over these years?
Yeah, they've done that. When I first took on the job, they had just come, they had just come off of the World Cup and I guess the following year, getting ready to qualify for the Olympics, that kind of thing, is about the time Thomas left. And, Desire Opranozi is one that spoke out at the World Cup very strongly. And she was the captain. She should have spoken out, for her teammates. But she spoke out. Now, I wasn't around. That was before my time. But she spoke out about not getting paid and all the issues that they were going through. And they dismissed her from the team. So when I first got in, I called her into camp and they wouldn't let me. The president had dismissed her. They didn't like the way she went to the public and went to the media and, kind of the stance that they took, and she was the leader, kind of the leader of the pack. So she's the one that got punished. So I'm really proud of her. I convinced the president later on, maybe 6 or 8 months into my tenure, to let us bring her back. So I'm really, she's one that I'm really proud of. And she was doing the right thing, and she was doing what her job called for her to do, being a captain. Asisat Oshoala is one I can always turn to and talk to, and she's very good about standing up and going to the federation and discussing. Now, she's not one that's going to go out publicly and do that publicly, but she's one that's willing to go in and butt heads and say what she believes and what the players need. And she's a very strong voice in there with us as well. Our captain right now, Anome Ibi, has played in 5 World Cups. This will be her 6th. She's got a good, strong voice within the federation too. So those players I'm really proud of. And then with what happened at AFCON, and I will share this in just a second, the irony of the whole situation, but one of our goalkeepers, Tochi, stood up in the meeting when they were boycotting and spoke her mind, and they dismissed her. They didn't like that. And she didn't go public. This was said in the confines of a team meeting room, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's taken me, after AFCON, she was not allowed into any of the other camps. We didn't have a November camp. She missed the February camp. She missed the April camp. So she hasn't been in anything with us since AFCON until we didn't get to go to Mexico with us, didn't go to Turkey with us, didn't come to the U.S. So I finally convinced them to let her back in, but she had to write a letter of apology and, all of these things. And so, yes, these are some players, those 4, I can tell you speak out and speak for the team, and really, really proud of them. The others, to be honest, I think have seen what's happened to them, and they fear coming out publicly, because they've seen an example of, you speak out publicly, you get dismissed. And the irony of all this is people don't realize this, and I just kind of took the heat. I've always kept the NFF out of it. Like at AFCON, I thought our players were brilliant in the Morocco game, going 2 players down with 30 minutes left in regulation. I don't know any other coach, any other team on the men or women's side in a championship format, in such an important event. I can't think of anybody. I've seen teams go a player down and get through it, but to go 2 players down, we went 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes in regulation, still stayed tied, actually got a goal with one of the players down. And then we had to go 30 minutes of extra time, so we played over 60 minutes with 9 players and got it to penalties. And so I thought it was just this heroic effort by the players. I thought as a staff, the subs and the things I did were right to get us that. And it gave us a chance. Now, we lost in penalties, but penalties are penalties, right? So, but it gave us the opportunity. So even though I'm disappointed because now we're not going to win AFCON, right? But you're still proud of the team effort. There's sometimes these things happen in games that you can't control. And quite frankly, I thought it was two really poor, soft calls, of stepping on a foot. But it happened, and that's where we were. But what most people didn't realize back home is right after that match, the players decided to boycott because they hadn't been paid. They wouldn't come out of their room. I'm meeting with them and I'm telling them, I'm getting on the bus. We need to go train. We need recovery. You played 60 minutes, 2 players down. Like these next 2 days recoveries were vital to us, and they wouldn't. So on the one hand, I'm disappointed in them because we still have a 3rd place match to play. The other hand, I understand it, and I support them that they want to stand up for themselves. So for the next 2 days, 3 days, whatever it was in between before we played Zambia, we didn't get on the field one time. We didn't go into a meeting room one time to do a scout, to do a team plan or prep for Zambia. And then we play. Then the federation finally flies a few people in the night before we played Zambia. We played Zambia like a 4 p.m. afternoon match. The night before, around 10 p.m., the people from the federation came in, brought some money. They called a team meeting. They wanted to have a discussion about what was going on. And so they came in, kind of explained what was happening, and then gave them some money, not all of their money, but gave them enough to pacify the players to get them to play the Zambia game. And then they opened it up for questions. And in that conversation, Tochi spoke up. And basically, I was in the meeting. I heard it word for word. Basically, what she was saying is that the excuses you're giving us are the excuses we've always been given. And she said, I've been in this program since I was, I think, 17 years old. And she said, I'm not a child anymore. I'm adult. I have family. I have responsibilities. And so you're telling us these things are happening and we're not kids. Like, we've heard this, and that's pretty much the way she said it. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't calling and singling anybody out. They asked for input from the team and she gave her input. Well, they didn't like the way she said it and dismissed her. And so the irony of that is the federation caused the problem because they didn't pay the players. The federation called a meeting of the players to have a discussion and asked them to discuss it. And then she says something and they don't like it and they dismiss her. I mean, I couldn't get them to see big picture. Like, how is that her fault? We caused this problem, the federation. And I never went to the media with that. I just took the heat after we lost to Zambia. I took the heat, and that's about the time the media really turned and got very negative with me, and it's kind of just been ongoing since then. But I just bit my tongue. I took it. I said, I got bigger fish to fry. We got other things we need to focus on. I'll just keep. So in my whole time there, I've never gone and said anything about the federation to media or anybody else. Where it would get out there publicly. I've always kind of just felt like I work for them. I have to, try to work within to get them to change what they're doing. But for me, I didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to be the one taking it out. But then we fast forward from this, and because they didn't allow Tochi, they dismissed her from the team. I have looked at probably 7 different local goalkeepers in my tenure there. I've got a former goalkeeper of the Super Falcons on my staff. It's one of my assistants. I've got a goalkeeping coach on my staff and another Nigerian on my staff. And these were all recommendations by those coaches that I looked at, and none have been good enough. I've got a third goalkeeper named Yawande that I brought in from the U.S. From there. So that was Chimaka Tochi and Yawande have been our three for 2 years. But in the meantime, I've been looking at when we'd have local camps, I would look at local keepers, or I'd bring in a keeper when one of those keepers couldn't make it to an event, and hadn't found one that I felt like was in our top three. So finally, after AFCON and after not having Tochi for many events, I kept fighting and fighting for her. And finally got to a point where we convinced the GS to allow her back, but she had to write a letter of apology, which she did. And quite honestly, between you and I, she didn't have anything to apologize for, but she did. So the understanding was, you bring her back, but if you want to use her, you're going to have to take a local goalkeeper to the World Cup as a third keeper, because they want to develop a new young keeper, because our goalkeepers are, Tochi's getting older, and Yawande is getting, older as well, 20, 29, somewhere in there, I think. And Tochi's 33 or 34. But they're all still playing at a really good level. And as you know, goalkeepers can play longer into their age anyway. So I didn't say anything about it then. I just thought, I got Tochi back, I'll address this down the road, But that was what they wanted to do. They wanted me to, if I was going to bring Tochi in, then I needed to bring in a local goalkeeper that they could develop. And my argument to them was always, the World Cup is not the time to develop somebody. Take your best players to the World Cup. Then we can bring the young goalkeepers in after that, whether it's qualifying for the Olympics or even after the Olympics, the following year, if you didn't feel like they were ready. So then we were supposed to have camp before the World Cup in Nigeria. We were supposed to I was promised 3 weeks of camp. So we were going to have the first week and a half was just going to be more local players. And I was going to have those local goalkeepers in that they wanted me to look at. And which was the U20 goalkeeper, by the way, that they wanted me to look at. And I had seen, obviously I watched all the U20 World Cup games, and I had seen her play, but I had never had her in camp. And then we were supposed to have, in those 3 weeks, we were also supposed to have about 10 more days where we brought all of the Super Falcons in. And anybody I picked from the local camp, I could mix into that 10 days and look at them together, and then make the decision on the 23 that would fly to Australia. Well, right before, we're getting ready to come to camp, they canceled the camp. They said, there's no money. We don't have the money to do this. We've got to book. And now FIFA makes us book airline tickets for every player to Australia. It has to be business class instead of just coach. So it was expensive, and they didn't have money. So at any rate, they canceled that camp after weeks of me fighting with them, and I could go into things on that, but I won't bore your listeners with all those details. But so when they asked for the list of 23, obviously I hadn't seen the U20 kid in a camp in person. So I picked the 3 keepers that I've had for 2 years. Well, they went ballistic. And GS told me I couldn't do this, and we had an agreement. You were to take a U20. And I said, yes, but we also had an agreement that I'd have 3 weeks in camp. Well, look at her. You didn't live up to your part of the deal. And so now I'm going to take the best players, that I know. I said, can you imagine me taking a player to the World Cup that I've never seen before? Like, who would do that? Who in the world as a coach would do that? And so we went back and forth a few days, and finally it got to a point where I said, look, it's in my contract that I pick my players. And immediately, not a day later, not hours later, immediately, as soon as I said that, he said, okay, you pick who you want then, but now Lauren Gregg can't come, which is my assistant. And she's the only one I really trust, and obviously she's won a World Cup championship with the U.S. She's won an Olympic gold medal with the U.S. She's probably one of the best female coaches in the U.S. and probably around the world for that matter, and brings a wealth of international experience. And I tried to understand, I said, what does she have to do with this? The staff, we shouldn't be talking about the staff. All we're talking about is a roster spot for a player. So we've gone back and forth. He's fought me on it. He wouldn't budge. He said, you can't take her. And so now I'm going into the World Cup shorthanded. I reached out to him, not this week, Monday, but 2 weeks ago on Monday, sent him an email because they won't answer my phone. They won't answer my text. Sent him and the president an email. Asked them to reconsider Lauren. And these are the reasons why. And basically apologize, which I didn't need to, but apologize to him for if he felt like I was going against a directive of taking the young player. I said, I apologize. That wasn't my intention. If we would have had camp, I could have seen her. And if she was good enough to be in year 3, then I would take her, right? It's competition. But I said, since I didn't see her is why I didn't take her. And I said, I hope someday you understand that. But basically, I apologized to him for that. Haven't heard a word from them in 2 weeks. No response. Sent them another message on Friday of that same week saying, guys, would you please give me the courtesy of responding, whatever the response is, because I'm trying to plan and prepare practices. Well, if I have Lauren, I can practice a certain way. I can split things up because she knows how I work. If I don't have Lauren, I've got to do it myself because my Nigerian assistants I haven't worked with enough. They don't know me well enough, and to handle things the way I want. No response from Friday. Sent a text to the GS on Monday. No response to the text. So I've just finally gotten to a point where it's just like, okay, we're going with what we have. The good news is I think our team is in a good place. They're in good spirits. They're unified. They're as together as we've ever been. So I feel good about that. My issues with the Federation are my issues. We'll make sure when I get there, the team understands. Let's just focus on our job. It's, has nothing to do with you. And we'll do the best we can, with it. But I'm not going to be quiet anymore. I'm going to let people know. Because the other side of this is I have a real close contact here in the U.S. that is very connected and on some of the boards at FIFA. This person told me that in October, every country was given $960,000 from FIFA to prepare for the World Cup. Where's that money? We got it. If Nigeria got it in October, why didn't we have why didn't we do a camp in November? When we went to Japan in whatever that was, February, I think it was a February window or maybe it was the October window. I can't remember. But when we went to Japan, I think it was in October.
Yeah.
We flew in and had a day rest and then played the game and then went home. Some of our players didn't arrive till the morning before the game.
Wow.
I think 5 players that were going to start for me arrived the night before the game, and the game was at 4:00. Now, they traveled 16 hours on a plane.
Yeah, across the world.
And we played Japan, and then we go home. Like, we wasted the last 5 days of that window to train. So all these questions I have is, where's this money? And then the other thing I found out from my FIFA connection is that if countries don't have the money to buy tickets, the business class tickets for everybody, FIFA would front that money and buy those tickets and then just deduct it from the monies that you get from FIFA after the World Cup. So there's no excuse of saying, well, we didn't have money to buy tickets, so we couldn't have camp or whatever. So but these are things, when I go back earlier to what I was saying to you, these are the kinds of things that the people in Nigeria don't question. In the U.S., that would be questioned. If the U.S. were going through the same things we're going through, the U.S. Soccer Federation would have to answer and divulge the information going, wait, here's where the money was spent, here's why we don't have the money, or else you do have the money and you've got to take. But, I mean, where does $960,000 go? Why aren't we prepared properly? FIFA also allows your staff to be, your technical staff, they allow you to have up to 22 people. Well, we've only got about 11,
wow,
right, on our staff. So if FIFA will pay bonuses for up to 22 people, why don't we have 22 people? Why don't I have an analyst? Why don't I have scouts? Listen, the U.S. right now has scouts in Europe now watching teams play these exhibitions just in case they face them at the World Cup. We don't even have scouts going with us to Australia. Like, I don't have anybody to scout games, if we were to get out of our group. I don't have anybody to scout games in our group. Everything I have to do is just through video, through what I can pick up online. So it's like, to me, I look at it and go, well, if you're allowed 22, but you're only taking 11, I know Nigeria is going to want the bonus money that the staff gets. So are they going to list 10 other names to give them 22 so they get that bonus money? Or are they going to just go, no, our staff is only going to be these 11 and that's all, and not work? Like, I don't know that. I'm not accusing them of that. But in my mind, I'm thinking of it of going, why wouldn't you do what you're allowed, to do? So I don't know. I mean, these are things that I just look at and I don't know. And I saw where the GS responded yesterday and kind of did some personal attacks on me after it came out of what I said yesterday in the podcast, the other podcast that I was on. I guess when that hit the media, I saw the response that GS kind of talked about. Well, I'm just trying to set it up because I know I'm missing 2 players against Canada, and I'm trying to set up failure and make excuses and all that in case we fail. And I'm like, well, I mean, how it just seems like a very childish, response to it. He never really addressed, and then they tried to say Lauren was ill and that's why they didn't let her come. And what had happened in AFCON is she had not taken the proper dosage of her blood pressure medication. That's all it was. So she got sick and they took her to the hospital that night and they ran tests and she was there for a day or so, got her settled back in and she was fine. Even our own medical doctor on our staff said she's fine. There's no issues. There's no danger of her dying or anything like that. And they didn't let me have her for the next couple of camps for that reason. Then we talked them in, like we did with Tochi, of bringing her back. They required her, and I still have all the documentation, they required her through email to get a doctor's letter stating she's healthy to do this and getting a lawyer's letter saying that we would indemnify her or we would absolve them from anything that would happen. The federation couldn't be held liable for it. And so we sent all of that paperwork in and she was back on board and everything was fine. Now all of a sudden, 2 weeks before we're leaving, the federation gets mad at me and that's all it was pure retaliation. Because as soon as I said, I'm not picking a goalkeeper I haven't seen, then it was an immediate, well, then you can't take Lauren. There wasn't any thought. There wasn't because it was medical. It was because, they don't understand I've kept everything, documentation that I've had, every piece of correspondence we've had since I've been the coach. So, that's kind of their side of trying to, make it look like it's not the way I brought it up. But there is even so much more out there that I could share with you. But this is kind of the big piece things that have happened a little bit.
I mean, all I can say is I can't wait to read your autobiography when it comes out. when you do your tell-all in a kind of couple of years.
I need a good co-writer, somebody that writes, and that's definitely Lauren and I have already decided that's got to happen. Yeah, people would not believe what's gone on here. We had similar issues when I was with Trinidad. But the issues with Trinidad and Tobago was just finances. They just didn't have money, right? But at least I had Sheldon Phillips as my general secretary, and he worked his tail off trying to get us everything that we needed, And he would say, what do you need? Hey, here's what I need. Well, we can't do it, Randy. We just don't have the money. How can we tweak it and get close to it? Like, at least the effort was there. Here, I have not had once in the 2.5 years I've been the coach, I've not had one time that the federation's come to me and said, what do you need, coach? What do you need to succeed?
Wow.
Never, not one single time have they ever come to me and taken that approach. And you would think with the men not qualifying for the World Cup, that they would want to put every resource available into the Super Falcons to do well. And and the interesting thing, in light of all of this, I think our players are going to do well. Like, they are really ready for this. Look, we got a hard group. I think our group is the hardest in the tournament, to be honest with you. You've got the defending Olympic gold medalist, ranked 10th in the world. And you've got Australia, the host country, and ranked 5th in the world. And Ireland is very good. They just played the U.S. twice, very, very close in 2 games. And I think they're ranked 22nd in the world. I would make an argument that ours is the hardest group in the tournament. But I think we still have the belief we can get something out of it and find a way, to get out of the group. Now, obviously, things have to go well, and we have to play well, and maybe some calls go our way, or you catch a team a little bit off, or like whatever. And that's all football, right? But I think the players are in a really good spot, and I think we have some talent in this team. We've got some really, really good players. So it's just disappointing they haven't been supported the way they need to really bring out everything that they have to offer.
Yeah, definitely. And for those listening and watching, kind of thinking about what happened at the AFCON in terms of Nigeria, they got to the semi-final, played against Morocco. And I urge anyone who's listening or watching to look at the highlights of that game, because I don't think, to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen such an amazing / intimidating atmosphere at a women's game anywhere in the world. Like I don't know what you think, Randy, but the stadium was bouncing, like sitting in the press box. I couldn't hear the guy sitting next to me. And it just kind of, like you said, obviously the result was disappointing, but in terms of the way the players reacted in fighting through that atmosphere. And, even, it was so close. I remember that the Monday Gift had that one shot right at the end when she hit the bar. That would have been kind of the goal of the tournament, and spectacular. Because, I don't know what you think, but in terms of both that and then that game in the final that I was at against Africa, the atmosphere was just kind of ludicrous. I remember speaking to Rosella Ayan, who is a Moroccan player, and she was kind of like, this is so hard because I can't even hear my teammates because that is so loud.
45,000 in the stadium, and it's packed, and you couldn't hear. The players couldn't hear me from the sidelines. I'm sure they couldn't hear each other, like she said, on the field. And but I tell you what, when you look at the African nations, and I think Nigeria still has this mentality that because they've won so many African Cup of Nations, that it's just their birthright to keep winning. And it was like, to me, going into that event, to me, the goal was to qualify for the World Cup. If we won AFCON, that was just icing on the cake. That was, not that we didn't want to win AFCON, because we did, obviously, but the primary objective is to be playing in the World Cup. And, so I think what they don't understand is Nigeria is not going to continue winning AFCONs. They're not going to continue even qualifying for a World Cup if they don't change the way they're doing business. When you look at, I don't know if you had a chance when you were in Morocco to go look at the National Training Center.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That National Training Center is as good, if not better, than almost any I've seen around the world.
Yeah.
Even the one we have in the U.S. It's phenomenal. The investment that they're making into women's football. I said this back in September the year before when I saw Morocco the first time. They're playing the best football, the best brand in all of Africa. They may not have quite the athletes all the way through that some of the other that Ghana has, or that we have, or South Africa, but their brand of football is so they're a country. Of course, we saw what their men did. They're a country that's invested and is going to get there. South Africa, even back when Vera was the coach, they started making an investment, and now they're seeing the fruits of that investment with, World Cups and being the African champions. And Nigeria has just sat still, and they just think, we have so many players playing, we'll just pull them together and we'll win. And the heat I'm taking now, wait till the next coach comes in that doesn't qualify for a World Cup. Oh my God. Yep. But it's coming if they're not careful. And a lot of people don't go and think back. We had 2 very, very difficult qualifying legs just to get to AFCON.
Yeah.
Advancing past Ghana, and according to Assisat, we hadn't beat Ghana in the last 2 or 3 years. So advancing past Ghana and then against Ivory Coast, those are two of the top 5 African nations playing right now. They're both deserving to be in a World Cup. Like they would both do well in a World Cup. So we've accomplished a lot considering all of the things that we've not done well. The other piece of this that I also said is after AFCON and we had lost to Morocco and then didn't get the result with Zambia, then we go on this trip. And I've heard the federation say, well, Randy's had more international friendlies than any Nigeria coach before. They're better prepared. And that's right. We've had more matches and more windows that we've been active than coaches before me. The thing about an international window is they're usually 10 days. And if you play 2 games, then you have very few days to train because of travel and then day before game and day after game. In some of those windows, you play 3. So you have no training time. So we'll get games, but we don't train. But the other side of this is then instead of asking me after AFCON, okay, we know we're going to the World Cup. Let's put a plan in place between AFCON now and the World Cup. Let's plan out our international windows. Where are we going? Who do we need to play? We have our draw. We kind of know the type teams we're going to play. We never sat down one time. I tried to do it. I tried to get them to communicate with me. So instead, they go to countries where countries will help them offset the cost. So we come to the U.S. after losing twice in AFCON. Then we go to Canada, and we play Canada twice. And my question is why? Let's go play Canada because we want to play top teams, but then let's pick up a team less.
Yeah. So
we can start to build our confidence back up, right? But we don't. We go play Canada twice. We lose, and we get a draw. Then we go to Japan. And we go in, and we have 16 hours and no rest. We play a game, we come home. We lost 2-0, but we lost 2-0 with a free kick and a penalty kick in a span of 2 minutes in the second half. Other than that, we were good on the day. And then we lose that window, right? So now we play Canada twice, Japan once. Then we come to the U.S. and we play the U.S. twice. Why? Play the U.S. once. Play another team. Like we should have built with games of teams that we could start to build our confidence back up, as a team. We go to Mexico. I'm happy that we got the window. We got 3 good games there with Mexico, Colombia, and Costa Rica. But in reality, none of those 3 teams play anything like Canada,
Australia, or Ireland.
Or Ireland. Like, why weren't we in Europe playing some teams that play like the group teams will play in our group? So there wasn't much thought, and so then the more media comes in. Well, he loses more games than anybody, any coach in Africa has lost or whatever. Well, yeah, because we've played, the U.S. since my tenure 3 times. We played Canada twice. Like most countries in the world would have lost against Canada, the U.S., and Japan. Those are 3 of the top teams in the world. Unless you're England, or unless you're maybe the Dutch or France or Germany or Spain, you're probably losing those games just like we did. That's the difference of the gap of the top of the world and the rest of the world. So I don't know. It's just there's so many things that we did wrong, but I had no input in it, and that's the disappointing thing is we didn't do this properly. And I guess the bottom line is these players deserve more. They deserve better, and at the end of the day, that's what keeps me going are the players. Otherwise, I would have walked away from this a long time ago, but it's just you see the players and what they give up and what little they have, and understanding every dollar that they can get is important to them. It just makes you want to fight and continue on for those players.
Yeah, absolutely. Coach, I just have one last question. I really appreciate all the time you've given us. But I mean,
Well, you bet.
just looking ahead to the World Cup, obviously, like we said, you probably are in the group of death with, Australia, Canada, and Ireland. And especially now that the World Cup's gone to a 32 team format, it's only the top two, whereas, previous World Cups, you could squeeze in as a third place team. For you, kind of given all of the chaos and the kind of tribulations that have happened over the last kind of year or 2 years, how do you as a coach and your players, once you get to Australia, block out all that noise and kind of say, look, we got 10 days to prepare. Look, we should have had 30, but we got this time. How do you just zone into that tournament? Because that's ultimately why you're here. That's why you've come in. That's why these players are here. It's for that World Cup. How do you zone in on that?
Yeah, I think we take exactly what you said. When I come in the first time we meet on the first day, we've got to let them understand. I've got to keep. They're in a really good place mentally and feeling confident after our trip to Turkey and with the good result against New Zealand and Haiti there and the team playing well. That probably was the best chemistry and the best group together in that Turkey trip in the last window that we've had probably ever. And so I think that was a good way to end the last window before we come into the World Cup. So I'll have to make them understand, don't pay attention, don't listen to the negativity. Let's don't look at what we don't have or what we should have had. Let's take these 10 days and let's just focus on the job at hand and get them to understand that I believe in them, that we can still get this done. And I think they have that belief they can get it done. And let's build on that. I think I'm not going to come in there and harp on all the issues that's going on now with me and the Federation and with the players and whatever. I don't know how much they read and hear it. I'm sure they're well aware of what's going on. But at the end of the day, I do believe in it. I do believe that we have enough talent. And look, we got 10 days. We got to figure it out. We've got to put the best thing in place that we can for Canada and as in that opening match. And so I'll have to just make sure that they understand, kind of like this us against the world mentality, like regardless of what's out there being said, regardless of lack of support by your own federal, whatever, put that aside. Let's go do all of this for each other. Let's fight for each other and take this as far as we can.
Absolutely.
So that'll be the message. Yeah.
And I mean, I do not envy the position that you're in, Coach, but thank you so much for coming to talk to us. We honestly, it sounds like it's been a really tough year for you and more so for Lauren as well. And for the players, but we're as a very biased media organization that supports African countries and teams, we are very much behind you and kind of cannot wait to be staying up till I think it'll be like 2:30 in the morning here to watch the games. But Coach, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.